The Memphis Grizzlies just fired head coach Taylor Jenkins with a 44-29 record, one of the best in the West, and with 9 games left until the playoffs. This is a completely unprecedented move, and for an organization that over the years has been largely seen as smart and patient, to make this decision at this time is completely shocking. Now, let me be clear. There are going to be Grizzlies fans in the comments of this video that are ecstatic about this news. They're just tired of him as the head coach. They think that the team underperforms because of him, and they're simply ready for something new. But to me, this is extremely confusing. On the court, at least, what has been reported so far, there is nothing fireable happening in Memphis. The things that haven't gone well from a basketball perspective over the last couple of seasons for the Grizzlies are not really on Taylor Jenkins. Is it his fault that they had historically bad injury luck last season? Is it his fault that Ja Morant hasn't been consistently healthy really for the entirety of his career and also this season? Is it his fault that Ja was weird on social media and got himself suspended? Of course not. And I'm not even mad at Ja about any of that stuff either. Hopefully he grows from it. Hopefully he gets healthier and it's not an issue anymore. But the point is, nothing fireable was happening in Memphis, yet Taylor Jenkins got fired anyway. Now, granted, if you look at their team success, they have only won 1 playoff series in his tenure. But if you really go through the years in Memphis, none of it was really his fault. 2019-20, they have rookie Ja Morant. They're a solid team. They have a really solid record, 34-39, 9th in the West, despite a super young roster. But then, of course, we know that that season ends up getting shortened. They go to the bubble. They have a really tough schedule in the bubble, and they don't perform well, and that's the end of the season. The following season, the 2020-21 season, Jaren Jackson plays just 11 games, but other guys on the roster start to develop. Ja gets much better. They finish 38-34, 8th in the West. They lose the first play-in game, but they end up beating Golden State in the second play-in game, and they make the playoffs. Now, they lose 4-1 to the Jazz in the first round, but this is where we're starting to see the Taylor Jenkins effect take place. You're seeing guys start to develop, and you can see what the future looks like in Memphis. Going into the 21-22 season, they add Steven Adams and really start to have this identity as this kind of grit and grind 2.0 team that's great on the offensive glass, really guards well, is super young, is super active, and they have the second best record in the entire Western Conference. They're 56-26, a huge jump from the year prior, despite the fact that Ja Morant and Dillon Brooks both have injury issues throughout the season, but the team in general looks really strong with 2 future All-Stars in Morant and Jaren Jackson, who's really developed at this point, and they win a first-round playoff series. They beat Minnesota in 6 games in the first round. But then the problem is, in the second round, Ja gets hurt. He only plays 3 games against Golden State. He misses half the series. They lose in 6 to the Warriors, and that Warriors team goes on to win the NBA title. But at this point, it's been established that Memphis is going to be something in the Western Conference moving forward. Most people agreed that that regular season record was inflated because of their play style. It was kind of like the old Tom Thibodeau Bulls, where they played extremely hard, they rebounded well, and they guarded well, but they were still question marks about their postseason success. But they got a playoff series win under their belts, and expectations were really high going into the following season. And what continues to be a theme for Memphis throughout the years, in the 22-23 season, they deal with a bunch of guys missing games. Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Steven Adams, all these guys are missing a bunch of games, but they still finish with 51 wins, the second best record in the Western Conference, and they go into the postseason as a team that people certainly have question marks in the playoffs about, but they seem to be a really good team. The problem is, Ja's beat up in the first round series against the Lakers, and they lose in 6 as the second seed in the West. And this is the moment where things start to turn for Taylor Jenkins in Memphis, because it's not just the injury stuff anymore. It's okay, now we have this reputation as a team that underperforms in the postseason, that no matter what they do in the regular season, just like this year, they're going to be on pace for potentially 50 wins this year, but people didn't know what to expect out of them in the postseason. Once they lose this series to the Lakers, and they've gotten this far into the Taylor Jenkins experience and tenure with 1 playoff series win, you can see things start to change within their fan base. And as we go into the 2023-24 season, everything falls apart. This is last year. They have insanely bad injury luck. They set records for the most players to play for a single team in a season. 33 different players played a game for the Memphis Grizzlies last year because so many different guys were hurt. This is a season in which they went into the year after adding Marcus Smart, changing around their roster significantly. Obviously, Dillon Brooks is no longer there, and it seems like they're trying to be more aggressive and trying to have a more veteran presence, like someone like Marcus Smart, because they're already dealing with some of the Ja Morant issues at this point. They're moving away from some of those other players like Dillon Brooks, and they want to be taken seriously as a postseason contender. And at no point during the season did they get a real chance to see how good their team actually is, because everybody's hurt. And most importantly for Memphis, Ja Morant only plays 9 games. He has all the social media stuff going on. He misses 25 games due to suspension. He comes back, immediately hurts his shoulder, plays just 9 games, and they are one of the worst teams in the entire league, unsurprisingly, given the injury issues. Which brings us to this season. At the time that Taylor Jenkins gets fired, they're 44-29, and they're just kind of had an up and down season. They look like one of the best teams in the conference, but they go through these little stretches where they're just not playing well at all. And when he gets fired, they're going through one of those stretches. Ja's missing some games because of a hamstring injury issue. He'd been in and out of the lineup really for most of the season, as had pretty much everybody on the roster. That's just kind of how things go in Memphis, it seems like. And the team decides enough is enough, and they need to move on and promote their assistant to be head coach. Now, after listing all of that out, how many of you actually think that from a basketball perspective, Taylor Jenkins deserved to be fired as head coach of the Memphis Grizzlies? It's going to be a hard sell to convince me that given everything I just listed, he actually deserved to be fired. And I'd imagine that there are plenty of you watching this video that agree with me, that realize that none of this was really his fault, and that Taylor Jenkins is probably going to be pretty in demand as a head coaching candidate for a team like potentially San Antonio if Greg Popovich doesn't come back, maybe Philadelphia if they move on from Nick Nurse. And whether you agree or disagree with the decision to fire Taylor Jenkins in the first place, the thing that I keep coming back to that continues to confuse me is the timing of this, because I went back and looked at previous head coaches. When you think about Kenny Atkinson getting fired by the Nets in March, when you think about Adrian Griffin getting fired by the Bucks, David Black getting fired by the Cavs, teams that fired their coaches in the middle of the season and late in the season, this combination of team success, a team that was only a couple of games out of second place in the conference, getting fired as late into the season as they did, there's really no historical comparison. Like I said, Kenny Atkinson got fired kind of around this time, a little bit earlier than this, but the Nets weren't all that good. They were 28-34. That's not all that surprising. David Blatt and Adrian Griffin both had great records at the time, just like Taylor Jenkins did, but they were fired pretty much right before the All-Star break when the team still had time to make changes. 9 games before the playoffs start is an unbelievably crazy time to fire your head coach. Now, that doesn't mean that there's absolutely no argument to be made for firing Taylor Jenkins. If you want to convince me that they just needed to move on from the guy, they needed a new voice, the players were just tired of hearing from him, and they're really excited about the assistant that they had that they're now promoting to head coach, that's not all that unprecedented. We've had guys like Dwayne Casey get Coach of the Year awards and then get fired immediately after. Then Nick Nurse takes over as the assistant that now becomes the head coach, and then the Raptors go on to win the title. Like, that stuff does happen. And things have been a little bit rocky lately between Jenkins and the organization in general. After the disaster that was last season, a lot of his old staff was fired or moved on to new situations. They changed around the staff a bunch, so it was clear that they weren't exactly seeing eye to eye in terms of how to run the team. But all of this stuff, all the things I'm listing, can be dealt with in the offseason. All of these things can be dealt with at a time where it would make sense to change everything about the team, not 9 games before the start of the playoffs. And beyond all of those questions, why did he get fired? Why did he get fired at this exact moment so close to the postseason? The one point that's sticking out to me in my head that I really need the answer to is, was any of this player-led? Was it a group of players? Was it a specific player, like potentially someone like Ja Morant or Jaren Jackson or one of the other stars of the team going to the front office, going to the organization saying, hey, the guys are not connecting with Taylor Jenkins. We need a new voice. He's been here for so long that we just need somebody new. If that happened, I can see a reasoning and a rationale for making this decision when they made it. Those are the inner workings that we're just not aware of. There's no reporting on that right now in terms of why exactly they made this move when they did. But suddenly I'm seeing the Grizzlies in a completely different light. This is an organization that I've seen make smart decision after smart decision over the years, develop their players really well, in large part because of Taylor Jenkins as head coach. They've been patient. They've made a bunch of different moves over the years that have made sense. And that's always kind of the tier that I've placed the Memphis Grizzlies as an organization. They develop their players. They draft well. They take advantage of every advantage that they have because they know they're not a bigger market team. They know they're not a destination. They know they need to build around homegrown players. And they've done that well. They've done it well enough to have one of the better records in the conference at various points over the last couple of seasons. And Taylor Jenkins did it well enough to be the all-time leader in wins as a head coach. And so for all these things to come together and end the way that they have, it does cause me to question a little bit what's happening here with the future in Memphis. Are they getting so desperate for postseason success that they're starting to rush decisions that they would not have otherwise? Are they getting so desperate and so frustrated and so impatient that now they are making moves that they just should not have made? Now, this could be the greatest thing the franchise has ever done, and the assistant coach is going to be awesome, and it's going to be a change they desperately needed, and we're going to see the new coach bump, and then they're going to go into next season and be great after maybe a not so great postseason run this year, depending on health, but it's just really hard to convince me that Taylor Jenkins did anything wrong here to deserve to be fired. Now, head coaches get fired all the time, despite the fact that they don't deserve to be fired. They can be doing a good job and still get fired. That's just the nature of how things work in the NBA. It's a player-led business. But when you look at the history of the Grizzlies in Taylor Jenkins' tenure and how it all led to his firing, I find it hard to believe that you're going to find many ways in which he could have done a better job as the head coach of the Grizzlies, specifically when it comes to all these injury issues. And like I said, he's going to be a very in-demand head coach after getting fired with 9 games left until the playoffs. That's still crazy to me.